The Book of Life, Daily Meditations with Krishnamurti. J. Krishnamurti, HarperCollins eBooks. Table of Contents. Introduction. Intelligence. What is? Sources praise. Also by J. Krishnamurti. Copyright about the publisher. Introduction. In 1934, Krishnamurti said, "Why do you want to be students of books instead of students of life? Find out what is true and false in your environment with all its oppressions and its cruelties, and then you will find out what is true." Repeatedly he pointed out that the Book of Life, which is ever-changing with a vitality that cannot be held in thought, was the only one worth reading, all others being filled with second-hand information. The story of mankind is in you, the vast experience, the deep-rooted fears, anxieties, sorrow, pleasure, and all the beliefs that man has accumulated throughout the millennia. You are that book. This book, The Book of Life, Daily Meditations with Krishnamurti, is arranged in an order somewhat replicating the way Krishnamurti delivered his talks. He usually began with listening, and the relationship between the speaker and the audience, and ended with subjects that naturally emerge when life is in order, and greater depth begins to surface into consciousness. During his last days in 1985 and 1986, he talked about creativity and the possibility of a totally new way of life. This book has excerpts on those subjects. Many themes recurred throughout his teachings. His vision was the whole broad observation of the human condition, wherein every aspect of life is interconnected. The Book of Life presents passages on a new theme for every week of the year, with each topic developed over 7 days. These quotations are identified by their source and referenced in the sources index. Readers who are interested in exploring specific themes in greater depth are invited to go to the full text of the books from which they are excerpted. Krishnamurti began speaking publicly in 1929 with a voice that Aldous Huxley described as having intrinsic authority. His powerful exploration of the nature of truth and freedom has resulted in millions of copies of his talks and dialogues being published and translated into more than 40 languages. Krishnamurti, although shy and retiring, tirelessly gave thousands of talks, delivered without notes or preparation, essentially unfolding one seminal theme. Truth can be discovered by anyone, without the help of any authority, and, as life is ever present, in an instant. His talks span the whole range of personal and social conflict and concern. Observing the depth and scope of our behavior, as it occurs in the moment, becomes the necessary action in transforming ourselves and our society. When asked by someone attending one of his talks why he spoke, and what he wanted to accomplish, replied, "I want to tell you something, perhaps the way to find out what is reality, not the way as a system, but how to set about it. And if you can find this for yourself, there will not be one speaker, there will be all of us talking, all of us expressing that reality in our lives where we are. Truth cannot be accumulated. What is accumulated is always being destroyed, it withers away. Truth can never wither because it can only be found from moment to moment in every thought, in every relationship, in every word, in every gesture, in a smile, in tears. And if you and I can find that and live it, the very living is the finding of it, then we shall not become propagandists. We shall be creative human beings. Not perfect human beings, but creative human beings, which is vastly different. And that, I think, is why I am talking, and perhaps that is why you are here listening. There is only the problem, there is no answer, for in the understanding of the problem lies its dissolution. Often, when he was asked a question, Krishnamurti responded, "Let us find out what we mean by," thus examining the question and opening it up for inquiry rather than immediately giving an answer. For Krishnamurti, probing a question or problem fueled that inquiry, rather than simply following a logical and intellectual search for an answer. The extracts in this book are presented to the reader as questions that might have been posed without a prompt from the reader for an immediate answer. Krishnamurti pointed out that the dialogue with his listeners in the talks that he gave was not intellectual and was not anchored in thoughts and ideals. He said, "After all, the purpose of these talks is to communicate with each other and not to impose upon you a certain series of ideas. Ideas never change the mind, never bring about a radical transformation in the mind. But if we can individually communicate with each other at the same time and at the same level, then perhaps there will be an understanding which is not merely propaganda, so these talks are not meant to dissuade or to persuade you in any way, either actually or subliminally." Oh, in almost all his public talks and dialogues, Krishnamurti used the terms mankind or man when referring to the whole of humanity. but in the latter part of his life, he frequently interrupted himself, told his audience. Please, when I say mankind, I mean the women too, so don't get mad at me. Krishnamurti spoke with extraordinary simplicity, and not as a guru or religious teacher with a derivative teaching, special vocabulary, or ties to any organization or sect. Demand for his clear, authentic teachings grew as he traveled the world. From 1930 until his death in 1986, he spoke to ever larger audiences in Europe, North America, Australia, South America, and India. This book contains excerpts taken from published and unpublished talks, dialogues and writings between 1933 and 1968. Among those is the first popular Krishnamurti book, read by the public at large, Education and the Significance of Life, written under a large oak tree in Ojai, California, and published in 1953 by Harper & Row, the publisher that was to continue for more than 30 years to publish his works in America. His next book, The First and Last Freedom, was also published by Harper & Row in 1954, and with a long preface by his friend Aldous Huxley. Commentaries on living were written between 1949 and 1955 in longhand, on pages without margins, and with no corrections or erasures. Aldous Huxley had encouraged Krishnamurti to write, and the manuscript, edited by D. Rajagopal, was published in 1956. Essentially, it is a chronicle of Krishnamurti's interviews with people who came to be with him and talk, and there is in these pages the feeling of a meeting of two friends talking and exploring, without hesitation or fear. The chapters in these books often open with a brief description of the landscape, climate, or nearby animals. From the simplicity of this natural world comes an easy transition to the inner landscape of confusion, anxiety, beliefs, the general and personal concerns people brought to their meetings with Krishnamurti. Some interviews were not published in those first 3 volumes of the Commentaries on Living, and they appear here for the first time. In some of these previously unpublished interviews, Krishnamurti used thought feeling to describe a unitary response. Life Ahead and Think on These Things were edited by Krishnamurti's friend Mary Ludians in 1963 and 1964, and published by Harper & Row. These 2 books comprise a compendium of selected and edited questions and answers from talks with young people, and have been so well received that they have come to be regarded as religious and literary classics. They were followed by a body of work that extends to more than 50 books. Krishnamurti thought himself unimportant and unnecessary to the process of understanding truth, of seeing ourselves. On one occasion, he referred to himself as a telephone, a mechanism to be used by a listener. He said, "What the speaker is saying has very little importance in itself. The really important thing is for the mind to be so effortlessly aware that it is in a state of understanding all the time. If we don't understand and merely listen to words, we invariably go away with a series of concepts or ideas, thereby establishing a pattern to which we then try to adjust ourselves in our daily or so-called spiritual lives. It might be worthwhile, as you read on, to be alert to the way Krishnamurti regarded the relationship between people searching for the truth. In 1981 he said, "We're like 2 friends sitting in the park on a lovely day talking about life, talking about our problems, investigating the very nature of our existence, and asking ourselves, seriously, why life has become such a great problem. Why, though intellectually we are very sophisticated, yet our daily life is such a grind without any meaning, except survival. Which again is rather doubtful. Why has life, everyday existence, become such a torture? We may go to church, follow some leader, political or religious, but the daily life is always a turmoil. Though there are certain periods which are occasionally joyful, happy, there is always a cloud of darkness about our life. And these 2 friends, as where, you and the speaker, are talking over together in a friendly manner, perhaps with affection, with care, with concern, whether it is at all possible to live our daily life without a single problem. Oh, January. Listening, learning, authority, self-knowledge. Oh, listen with bass. Have you ever sat very silently, not with your attention fixed on anything, not making an effort to concentrate, but with the mind very quiet, really still? Then you hear everything, don't you? You hear the far-off noises as well as those that are nearer, and those that are very close by, the immediate sounds, which means really that you are listening to everything. Your mind is not confined to one narrow little channel. If you can listen in this way, listen with ease, without strain, you will find an extraordinary change taking place within you, a change that comes without your volition, without your asking, and in that change there is great beauty and depth of insight. January 1. Putting aside screens. How do you listen? Do you listen with your projections, through your projection, through your ambitions, desires, fears, anxieties, through hearing only what you want to hear? Only what will be satisfactory, what will gratify, what will give comfort, what will for the moment alleviate your suffering. If you listen through the screen of your desires, then you obviously listen to your own voice. You are listening to your own desires. And is there any other form of listening? Is it not important to find out how to listen not only to what is being said, but to everything, to the noise in the streets, to the chatter of birds, to the noise of the tramcar, to the restless sea, to the voice of your husband, to your wife, to your friends, to the cry of a baby? Listening has importance only when one is not projecting one's own desires through which one listens. Can one put aside all these screens through which we listen and re-listen? January 2. Beyond the noise of words. Listening is an art not easily come by, but in it there is beauty and great understanding. We listen with the various depths of our being, but our listening is always with a preconception, or from a particular point of view. We do not listen simply. There is always the intervening screen of our own thoughts, conclusions, and prejudices. To listen there must be an inward quietness, a freedom from the strain of acquiring, a relaxed attention. This alert yet passive state is able to hear what is beyond the verbal conclusion. Words confuse. They are only the outward means of communication. But to commune beyond the noise of words, there must be in listening an alert passivity. Those who love may listen, but it is extremely rare to find a listener. Most of us are after results, achieving goals. We are forever overcoming and conquering, and so there is no listening. It is only in listening that one hears the song of the words. January 3. Listening without thought. I do not know whether you have listened to a bird. To listen to something demands that your mind be quiet. Not a mystical quietness, but just quietness. I am telling you something, and to listen to me you have to be quiet, not have all kinds of ideas buzzing in your mind. When you look at a flower, you look at it, not naming it, not classifying it, not saying that it belongs to a certain species. When you do these, you cease to look at it. Therefore, I am saying that it is one of the most difficult things to listen to the communist, to the socialist, to the congressman, to the capitalist, to anybody, to your wife, to your children, to your neighbor, to the bus conductor, to the bird, just to listen. It is only when you listen without the idea, with aught, that you are directly in contact, and being in contact, you will understand whether what he is saying is true or false. You do not have to discuss. Listening brings freedom. When you make an effort to listen, are you listening? Is not that very effort a distraction that prevents listening? Do you make an effort when you listen to something that gives you delight? You are not aware of the truth, nor do you see the false, as long as your mind is occupied in any way with effort, with comparison, with justification, condemnation. Listening itself is a complete act. The very act of listening brings its own freedom. But are you really concerned with listening, or with altering the turmoil within? If you would listen in the sense of being aware of your conflicts and contradictions without forcing them into any particular pattern of thought, perhaps they might altogether cease. You see, we are constantly trying to be this or that, to achieve a particular state, to capture one kind of experience and avoid another, so the mind is everlastingly occupied with something. It is never still to listen to the noise of its own struggles and pains. Be simple, and don't try to become something or to capture some experience, listening without effort. You are now listening to me. You are not making an effort to pay attention. You are just listening, and if there is truth in what you hear, you will find a remarkable change taking place in you. A change that is not premeditated or wished for, a transformation, a complete revolution in which the truth alone is master, and not the creations of your mind. And if I may suggest it, you should listen in that way to everything, not only to what I am saying, but also to what other people are saying, to the birds, to the whistle of a locomotive, to the noise of the bus going by. You will find that the more you listen to everything, the greater is the silence, and that silence is then not broken by noise. It is only when you are resisting something, when you are putting up a barrier between yourself and that to which you do not want to listen. It is only then that there is a struggle. January 6. Listening to yourself. Questioner. While I am here listening to you, I seem to understand, but when I am away from here, I don't understand even though I try to apply what you have been saying. Krishnamurti. You are listening to yourself, and not to the speaker. If you are listening to the speaker, he becomes your leader, your way to understanding, which is a horror, an abomination, because you have then established the hierarchy of authority. So what you are doing here is listening to yourself. You are looking at the picture the speaker is painting, which is your own picture, not the speaker says. If that much is clear, that you are looking at yourself, then you can say, well, I see myself as I am, and I don't want to do anything about it, and that is the end of it. But if you say, I see myself as I am, and there must be a change, then you begin to work out of your own understanding, which is entirely different from applying what the speaker is saying. But if, as the speaker is speaking, you are listening to yourself, then out of that listening there is clarity, there is sensitivity. Out of that listening the mind becomes healthy, strong. Neither obeying nor resisting, it becomes alive, intense, and it is only such a human being who can create a new generation, a new world. January 7. Look with intensity. It seems to me that learning is astonishingly difficult, as is listening also. We never actually listen to anything because our mind is not free, our ears are stuffed up with those things that we already know, so listening becomes extraordinarily difficult. I think, or rather, it is a fact, that if one can listen to something with all of one's being, with vigor, with vitality, then the very act of listening is a liberative factor, but unfortunately, never do listen, as you have never learned about it. After all, you only learn when you give your whole being to something. When you give your whole being to mathematics, you learn. But when you are in a state of contradiction, when you do not want to learn but are forced to learn, then it becomes merely a process of accumulation. To learn is like reading a novel with innumerable characters. It requires your full attention, not contradictory attention. If you want to learn about a leaf of the spring or a leaf of the summer, you must really look at it, see the symmetry of it, the texture of it, the quality of the living leaf. There is beauty, there is vigor, there is vitality in a single leaf. So to learn about the leaf, the flower, the cloud, the sunset, or a human being, you must look with all intensity. To learn, the mind must be quiet. To discover anything new, you must start on your own. You must start on a journey completely denuded, especially of knowledge, because it is very easy, through knowledge and belief, to have experiences. But those experiences are merely the products of self-projection, and therefore utterly unreal, false. If you are to discover for yourself what is the new, it is no good carrying the burden of the old, especially knowledge, the knowledge of another, however great. You use knowledge as a means of self-projection, security, and you want to be quite sure that you have the same experiences as the Buddha, or the Christ, or X. But a man who is protecting himself constantly through knowledge is obviously not a truth seeker. For the discovery of truth there is no path. When you want to find something new, when you are experimenting with anything, your mind has to be very quiet, has it not? If your mind is crowded, filled with facts, knowledge, they act as an impediment to the new. The difficulty for most of us is that the mind has become so important, so predominant significant, that it interferes constantly with anything that may be new, with anything that may exist simultaneously with the known. Thus knowledge and learning are impediments for those who would seek, for those who would try to understand that which is timeless. Oh, learning is not experience. The word learning has great significance. There are tokens of learning. For most of us, learning means the accumulation of knowledge, of experience, of technology, of a skill, of a language. There is also psychological learning, learning through experience, either the immediate experiences of life, which leave a certain residue, of tradition, of theoris, of society. There are these two kinds of learning how to meet life, psychological and physiological, outward skill and inward skill. There is really no line of demarcation between the two. They overlap. We are not considering for the moment the skill that we learn through practice, the technological knowledge that we acquire through study. What we are concerned about is the psychological learning that we have acquired through the centuries or inherited as tradition, as knowledge, as experience. This we call learning, but I question whether it is learning at all. I am not talking about learning a skill, a language, a technique, but I am asking whether the mind ever learns psychologically. It has learned, and with what it has learned it meets the challenge of life. It is always translating life or the new challenge according to what it has learned. That is what we're doing. Is that learning? Doesn't learning imply something new? Something that I don't know and am learning? If I am merely adding to what I already know, it is no longer learning. January 10. When is learning possible? To inquire and to learn is the function of the mind. By learning, I do not mean the mere cultivation of memory or the accumulation of knowledge, but the capacity to think clearly and sanely without illusion, to start from facts and not from beliefs, ideals. There is no learning if thought originates from conclusions. Merely to acquire information or knowledge is not to learn. Learning implies the love of understanding and the love of doing a thing for itself. Learning is possible only when there is no coercion of any kind. And coercion takes many forms, does it not? There is coercion through influence, through attachment or threat, through persuasive encouragement, or subtle forms of reward. Most people think that learning is encouraged through comparison, whereas the contrary is the fact. Comparison brings about frustration and merely encourages envy, which is called competition. Like other forms of persuasion, comparison prevents learning and breeds fear. January 11. Learning is never accumulative. Learning is one thing, and acquiring knowledge is another. Learning is a continuous process, not a process of addition, not a process which you gather and then from there act. Most of us gather knowledge as memory, as idea, store it up as experience, and from there act. That is, we act from knowledge, technological knowledge, knowledge as experience, knowledge as tradition, knowledge that one has derived through one's particular idiosyncratic tendencies. With that background, with that accumulation as knowledge, as experience, as tradition, we act. In that process there is no learning. Learning is never accumulative, it is a constant movement. I do not know if you have ever gone into this question at all. What is learning and what is the acquisition of knowledge? Learning is never accumulative. You cannot store up learning and then from that storehouse act. You learn as you are going along. Therefore, there is never a moment of retrogression, or deterioration, or decline. January 12. Learning has no past. Wisdom is something that has to be discovered by each one, and it is not the result of knowledge. Knowledge and wisdom do not go together. Wisdom comes when there is the maturity of self-knowing. Without knowing oneself, order is not possible, and therefore there is no virtue. Now, learning about oneself and accumulating knowledge about oneself are two different things. A mind that is acquiring knowledge is never learning. What it is doing is this. It is gathering to itself information, experiences knowledge, and from the background of what it has gathered, it experiences, it learns, and therefore it is never really learning, but always knowing, acquiring. Learning is always in the active present. It has no past. The moment you say to yourself, I have learned, it has already become knowledge, and from the background of that knowledge you can accumulate, translate, but you can further learn. It is only a mind that is not acquiring, but always learning. It is only such a mind that can understand this whole entity that we call the me, the self. I have to know myself, the structure, the nature, the significance of the total entity. But I can't do that burdened with my previous knowledge, with my previous experience, or with a mind that is conditioned. For then I am not learning. I am merely interpreting, translating, looking with an eye that is already clouded by the past. Authority prevents learning. We generally learn through study, through books, through experience, or through being instructed. Those are the usual ways of learning. We commit to memory what to do and what not to do, what to think and what not to think, how to feel, how to react. Through experience, through study, through analysis, through probing, through introspective examination, we store up knowledge as memory. And memory then responds to further challenges and demands, from which there is more and more learning. What is learned is committed to memory as knowledge, and that knowledge functions whenever there is a challenge, or whenever we have to do something. Now I think there is a totally different way of learning, and I am going to talk a little bit about it. But to understand it, and to learn in this different way, you must be completely rid of authority. Otherwise, you will merely be instructed, and you will repeat what you have heard. That is why it is very important to understand the nature of authority. Authority prevents learning that is not the accumulation of knowledge as memory. Memory all responds in patterns, there is no freedom. A man who is burdened with knowledge, with instructions, who is weighted down by the things he has learned, is never free. He may be most extraordinarily erudite, but his accumulation of knowledge prevents him from being free, and therefore he is incapable of learning. January 14. To destroy is to create. To be free, you have to examine authority, the whole skeleton of authority, tearing to pieces the whole dirty thing. And that requires energy, actual physical energy, and also, it demands psychological energy. But the energy is destroyed, is wasted when one is in conflict. So when there's the understanding of the whole process of conflict, there's the ending of conflict, there is abundance of energy. Then you can proceed, tearing down the house that you have built throughout the centuries, and that has no meaning at all. You know, to destroy is to create. We must destroy, not the buildings, not the social or economic system. This comes about daily, but the psychological, the unconscious and the conscious defenses, securities that one has built up rationally, individually, deeply, and superficially. We must tear through all that to be utterly defenseless, because you must be defenseless to love and have affection. Then, you see and understand ambition, authority, and you begin to see when authority is necessary and at what level, the authority of the policeman and no more. Then, there is no authority of learning, no authority of knowledge, no authority of capacity, no authority that function assumes, and which becomes status. To understand all authority, of the gurus, of the masters and others requires a very sharp mind, a clear brain, not a muddy brain, not a dull brain. January 15. Virtue has no authority. Can the mind be free from authority, which means free from fear, so that it is no longer capable of following? If so, this puts an end to imitation, which becomes mechanical. After all, virtue, ethics, is not a repetition of what is good. The moment it becomes mechanical, it ceases to be virtue. Virtue is something that must be from moment, like humility. Humility cannot be cultivated, and a mind that has no humility is incapable of learning. So virtue has no authority. The social morality is no morality at all. It's immoral because it admits competition, greed, ambition, and therefore society is encouraging immorality. Virtue is something that transcends morality. Without virtue there is no order, and order is not according to a pattern, according to a formula. A mind that follows a formula through disciplining itself to achieve virtue creates for itself the problems of immorality, an external authority that the mind objectifies, apart from the law, as God, as moral, and so on, becomes destructive when the mind is seeking to understand what real virtue is. We have our own authority as experience, as knowledge, which we are trying to follow. There is this constant repetition, imitation, which we all know. Psychological authority? Not the authority of the law. The policeman who keeps order thefts psychological authority, which each one has, becomes destructive of virtue because virtue is something that is living, moving. As you cannot possibly cultivate humility, as you cannot possibly cultivate love, so also virtue cannot be cultivated, and there is great beauty in that. Virtue isn't mechanical, and without virtue, there is no foundation for clear thinking. January 16. The 1D mind is bound by authority. The problem then is it possible for a mind that has been so conditioned, brought up in innumerable sects, religions and all the superstitions, fears, to break away from itself, and thereby bring about a new mind? The old mind is essentially the mind that is bound by authority. I am not using the word authority in the legalistic sense, but by that word I mean authority as tradition, authority as knowledge, authority as experience, authority as the means of finding security, remaining in that security, outwardly or inwardly, because, after all, that is what the mind is all seeking, a place where it can be secure, undisturbed. Such authority may be the self-imposed authority of an idea or the so-called religious idea of God, which has no reality to a religious person. An idea is not a fact, it is a fiction. Goddess a fiction. You may believe in it, but still it is a fiction. But to find God you must completely destroy the fiction, because the old mind is the mind that is frightened, is ambitious, is fearful of death, of living, and off relationship. And it is always, consciously or unconsciously, seeking a permanency, security. January 17. Free at the beginning. If we can understand the compulsion behind our desire to dominate or to be dominated, then perhaps we can be free from the crippling effects of authority. We crave to be certain, to be right, to be successful, to know. And this desire for certainty, for permanence, builds up within ourselves the authority of personal experience, while outwardly it creates the authority of society, of the family, of religion, and soon. But merely to ignore authority, to shake off its outward symbols, is of very little significance. To break away from one tradition and conform to another, to leave this leader and follow that, is but a superficial gesture. If we are to be aware of the whole process of authority, if we are to see the inwardness of it, if we are to understand and transcend the desire for certainty, then we must have extensive awareness and insight. We must be free, not at the end, but at the beginning. January 18. Liberation from ignorance, from sorrow. We listen with hope and fear. We seek the light of another but are not alertly passive to be able to understand. If the liberated seems to fulfill our desires, we accept him. If not, we continue our search for the one who will. What most of us desire is gratification at different levels. What is important is not how to recognize one who is liberated but how to understand yourself. No authority here or hereafter can give you knowledge of yourself. Without self-knowledge there is no liberation from ignorance, from sorrow. January 19. Why do we follow? Why do we accept? Why do we follow? We follow another's authority, another's experience, and then doubt it. This search for authority and its sequel, disillusionment, is a painful process for most of us. We blame or criticize the once accepted authority, the leader, the teacher, but we do not examine our own craving for an authority who can direct your conduct. Once we understand this craving, we shall comprehend the significance of doubt. To January 20. Authority corrupts both leader and follower. Self-awareness is arduous, and since most of us prefer an easy, illusory way, we bring into being the authority that gives shape and pattern to our life. This authority may be the collective, the state, or it may be the personal, the master, the savior, the guru. Authority of any kind is blinding, it breeds thoughtlessness, and as most of us find that to be thoughtful is to have pain, we give ourselves over to authority. Authority engenders power, and power always becomes centralized, and therefore utterly corrupting. It corrupts not only the wielder of power, but also him who follows it. The authority of knowledge and experience is perverting, whether it be vested in the master, his representative, or the priest. It is your own life, this seemingly endless conflict, that is significant, and not the pattern or the leader. The authority of the master and the priest takes you away from the central issue, which is the conflict within yourself. January 21. Can I rely on my experience? Most of us are satisfied with authority because it gives us a continuity, a certainty, a sense of being protected. But a man who would understand the implications of this deep psychological revolution must be free of authority, must he note? He cannot look to any authority, whether of his own creation or imposed upon him by another. And is this possible? Is it possible for me not to rely on the authority of my own experience? Even when I have rejected all the outward expressions of authority, books, teachers, priests, churches, beliefs, I still have the feeling that at least I can rely on my own judgment, on my own experiences, on my own analysis. But can I rely on my experience, on my judgment, on my analysis? My experience is the result of my conditioning, just as yours is the result of your conditioning, is it not? I may have been brought up as a Muslim, or a Buddhist, or a Hindu, and my experience will depend on my cultural, economic, social, and religious background, just as yours will. And can I rely on that? Can I rely for guidance, for hope, for the vision which will give me faith in my own judgment, which again, is the result of accumulated memories, experiences, the conditioning of the past meeting, the present? Now, when I have put all these questions to myself and I am aware of this problem, I see there can only be one state in which reality, newness, can come into being, which brings about a revolution. That state is when the mind is completely empty of the past, when there is no analyzer, no experience, no judgment, no authority of any kind. January 22. Self-knowledge is a process. So, to understand the innumerable problems that each one of us has, is it not essential that there be self-knowledge? And that is one of the most difficult things. Self-awareness, which does not mean an isolation, a withdrawal. Obviously, to know oneself is essential, but to know oneself does not imply a withdrawal from relationship. And it would be a mistake, surely, to think that one can know oneself significantly, completely, fully, through isolation, through exclusion, or by going to some psychologist, or to some priest, or that one can learn self-knowledge through a book. Self-knowledge is obviously a process, not an end in itself, and to know oneself, one must be aware of oneself in action, which is relationship. You discover yourself, not in isolation, not in withdrawal, but in relationship. In relationship to society, to your wife, your husband, your brother, to man. But to discover how you react, what your responses are, requires an extraordinary alertness of mind, a keenness of perception. January 23. The untethered mind. The transformation of the world is brought about by the transformation of oneself, because the self is the product and a part of the total process of human existence. To transform oneself, self-knowledge is essential. Without knowing what you are, there is no basis for right thought, and without knowing yourself there cannot be transformation. One must know oneself as one is, not as one wishes to be, which is merely an ideal and therefore fictitious, unreal. It is only that which is that can be transformed, not that which you wish to be. To know oneself as one is requires an extraordinary alertness of mind, because what is constantly undergoing transformation, change, and to follow it swiftly the mind must not be tethered to any particular dogma or belief, to any particular pattern of action. If you would follow anything, it is no good being tethered. To know yourself, there must be the awareness, the alertness of mind in which there is freedom from all beliefs, from idealization, because beliefs and ideals only give you a color, perverting true perception. If you want to know what you are, you cannot imagine or have belief in something which you are not. If I am greedy, envious, violent, merely having an ideal of non-violence, of non-greed, is of little value. The understanding of what you are, whatever it be, ugly or beautiful, wicked or mischievous, the understanding of what you are without distortion is the beginning of virtue. Virtue is essential, for it gives freedom. January 24. Active self-knowledge. Without self-knowledge, experience breeds illusion. With self-knowledge, experience, which is the response to challenge, does not leave a cumulative residue as memory. Self-knowledge is the discovery, from moment to moment, of the ways of the self, its intentions and pursuit, its thoughts and appetites. There can never be your experience and my experience. The very term my experience indicates ignorance and the acceptance of illusion. January 25. Creativeness, through self-knowledge. There is no method for self-knowledge. Seeking a method invariably implies the desire to attain some result, and that is what we all want. We follow authority, if not that of a person, then of a system, of an ideology, because we want our result that will be satisfactory, which will give us security. We really do not want to understand ourselves, or impulses and reactions, the whole process of our thinking, the conscious as well as the unconscious. We would rather pursue a system that assures us of a result. But the pursuit of a system is invariably the outcome of our desire for security, for certainty, and the result is obviously not the understanding of oneself. When we follow a method, we must have authorities, the teacher, the guru, the savior, master, who will one guarantee us what we desire, and surely that is not the way to self-knowledge. Authority prevents the understanding of oneself, does it not? Under the shelter of an authority, a guide, you may have temporarily a sense of security, a sense of well-being, but that is not the understanding of the total process of oneself. Authority in its very nature prevents the full awareness of oneself, and therefore ultimately destroys freedom. In freedom alone can there be creativeness. There can be creativeness only through self-knowledge. January 26. Quiet mind, simple mind. When we are aware of ourselves, is not the whole movement of living a way of uncovering the me, the ego, the self? The self is a very complex process that can be uncovered only in relationship, in our daily activities, in the way we talk, the way we judge, calculate, the way we condemn others and ourselves. All that reveals the conditioned state of our own thinking, and is it not important to be aware of this whole process? It is only through awareness of what is true from moment to moment that there is discovery of the timeless, the eternal. Without self-knowledge, the eternal cannot be. When we do not know ourselves, the eternal becomes a mere word, a symbol, a speculation, a dogma, a belief, an illusion to which the mind can escape. But if one begins to understand the me, in all its various activities from day to day, then in that very understanding, without any effort, venomless, the timeless comes into being. But the timeless is not a reward for self-knowledge. That which is eternal cannot be sought after, the mind cannot acquire it. It comes into being when the mind is quiet, and the mind can be quiet only when it is simple, when it is no longer storing up condemning, judging, weighing. It is only the simple mind that can understand the real, not the mind that is full of words, knowledge, information. The mind that analyzes, calculates, is not a simple mind. January 27. Self-knowing. Without knowing yourself, do what you will, there cannot possibly be the state of meditation. I mean by self-knowing, knowing every thought, every mood, every word, every feeling, knowing the activity of your mind, not knowing the supreme self, the big self. There is no such thing. The higher self, the Atma, is still within the field of thought. Thought is the result of your conditioning, thought is the response of your memory, ancestral or immediate. And merely to try to meditate without first establishing deeply, irrevocably, that virtue which comes about through self-knowing is utterly deceptive and absolutely useless. Please, it is very important for those who are serious to understand this. Because if you cannot do that, your meditation and actual living are divorced, are apart, so wide apart that though you may meditate taking postures indefinitely, for the rest of your life, you will not see beyond your nose. Any posture you take, anything that you do, will have no meaning whatsoever. It is important to understand what this self-knowing is, just to be aware, without any choice, of the me which has its source in a bundle of memories. Just to be conscious of it without interpretation, merely to observe the movement of the mind. But that observation is prevented when you are merely accumulating through observation, what to do, what not to do, what to achieve. If you do that, you put an end to the living process of the movement of the mind as the self. That is, I have to observe and see the fact, the actual, the what is. If I approach it with an idea, with an opinion, such as I must not, or I must, which are the responses of memory, then the movement of what is hindered, is blocked. And therefore, there is no learning. January 28. Creative emptiness. Can you not just listen to this as the soil receives these, and see if the mind is capable of being free, empty? It can be empty only by understanding all its own projections, its own activities, not off and on, but from day to day, from moment to moment. Then you will find the answer. Then you will see that the change comes without your asking, that the state of creative emptiness is not a thing to be cultivated. It is there. It comes darkly, without any invitation. And only in that state is there a possibility of renewal, newness, revolution. January 29. Self-knowledge. Right thinking comes with self-knowledge. Without understanding yourself, you have no basis for thought. Without self-knowledge, what you think is not true. You and the world are not two different entities with separate problems. You and the world are one. Your problem is the world's problem. You may be the result of certain tendencies, of environmental influences, but you are no different fundamentally from another. Inwardly, we are very much alike. We are all driven by greed, ill will, fear, ambition, and so on. Our beliefs, hopes, aspirations have a common basis. We are one. We are one humanity, though the artificial frontiers of economics and politics and prejudice divide us. If you kill another, you are destroying yourself. You are the center of the whole, and without understand yourself you cannot understand reality. We have an intellectual knowledge of this unity, but we keep knowledge and feeling in different compartments, and hence whenever experience the extraordinary unity of man. January 30. Relationship is a mirror. Self-knowledge is not according to any formula. You may go to a psychologist or a psychoanalyst to find out about yourself, but that is not self-knowledge. Self-knowledge comes into being when we are aware of ourselves in relationship, which shows what we are from moment to moment. Relationship is a mirror in which to see ourselves as we actually are. But most of us are incapable of looking at ourselves as we are in relationship, because we immediately begin to condemn or justify what we see. We judge, we evaluate, we compare, we deny or accept, but we never observe actually what is. And for most people this seems to be the most difficult thing to do, yet this alone is the beginning of self-knowledge. If one is able to see oneself as one is in this extraordinary mirror of relationship, which does not distort, if one can just look into this mirror with full attention and see actually what is, be aware of it without condemnation, without judgment, without evaluation, and only does this when there is earnest interest. Then one will find that the mind is capable of freeing itself from all conditioning, and it is only then that the mind is free to discover that which lies beyond the field of thought. After all, however learned, or however petty the mind may be, it is consciously or unconsciously limited, conditioned, and any extension of this conditioning is still within the field of thought. So freedom is something entirely different. January 31. Oh, February. Becoming. Belief. Action. Good and evil. Becoming is strife. Life as we know it, our daily life, is a process of becoming. I am poor and I act with an end in view, which is to become rich. I am ugly and I want to become beautiful. Therefore my life is a process of becoming something. The will to be is the will to become, at different levels of consciousness, in different states, in which there is challenge, response, naming, and recording. Now, this becoming is strife, this becoming is pain, is it not? It is a constant struggle. I am this, and I want to become that. A one I becoming is disintegration. The mind has an idea, perhaps pleasurable, and it wants to like that idea, which is a projection of your desire. You are this, which you do not like, and you want to become that which you like. The ideal is a self-projection, the opposite is an extension of what is. It is not the opposite at all, but a continuity of what is, perhaps somewhat modified. The projection is self-willed, and conflict is the struggle towards the projection. You are struggling to become something, and that something is part of yourself. The ideal is your own projection. See how the mind has played a trick upon itself? You are struggling after words, pursuing your own projection, your own shadow. You are violent, and you are struggling to become non-violent, the ideal. But the ideal is a projection of what is, only under a different name when you are aware of this trick that you have played upon yourself, then the false as the false is seen. The struggle towards an illusion is the disintegrating factor. One conflict, all becoming is disintegration. When there is an awareness of this trick that the mind has played upon itself, then there is only what is. When the mind is stripped of all becoming, of all ideals, of all comparison and condemnation, when its own structure has collapsed, then the what is has undergone complete transformation. As long as there is the naming of what is, there is relationship between the mind and what is. But when this naming process, which is memory, thievery structure of the mind, is not, then what is not. In this transformation alone is there integration. February 2. Can the crude mind become sensitive? Listen to the question, to the meaning behind the words. Can the crude mind become sensitive? If I say my mind is screwed and I try to become sensitive, the very effort to become sensitive is crudity. Please see this. Don't be intrigued, but watch it. Whereas, if I recognize that I am crude without wanting to change, without trying to become sensitive, if I begin to understand what crudeness is, observe it in my life from day to day, the greedy way I eat, the roughness with which I treat people, the pride, the arrogance, the coarseness of my habits and thoughts, then that very observation transforms what is. Similarly, if I am stupid and I say I must become intelligent, the effort to become intelligent is only a greater form of stupidity, because what is important is to understand stupidity. However much I may try to become intelligent, my stupidity will remain. I may acquire the superficial polish of learning, I may be able to quote books, repeat passages from great authors, but basically I shall still be stupid. But if I see and understand stupidity as it expresses itself in my daily life, how I behave toward my servant, how I regard my neighbor, the poor man, the rich man, the clerk, then that very awareness brings about a breaking up of stupidity. February 3. Opportunities for self-expansion. Hierarchical structure offers an excellent opportunity for self-expansion. You may want brotherhood, but how can there be brotherhood if you are pursuing spiritual distinctions? You may smile at worldly titles, but when you admit the Master, the Savior, the Guru in the realm of the Spirit, are you not carrying over the worldly attitude? Can there be hierarchical divisions or degrees in spiritual growth, in the understanding of truth, in the realization of God? Love admits no division. Either you love or do not love, but do not make the lack of love into a long drawn-out process whose end is love. When you know you do not love, when you are choicelessly aware of that fact, then there is a possibility of transformation. But to sedulously cultivate this distinction between the master and the pupil, between those who have attained and those who have not, between the Savior and the sinner, is to deny love. The exploiter, who is in turn exploited, finds a happy hunting ground in this darkness and illusion. Separation between God or reality and yourself is brought about by you, by the mind that clings to the known, to certainty, to security. This separation cannot be bridged over. There is no ritual, no discipline, no sacrifice that can carry you across it. There is no savior, no master, no guru, who can lead you to the real or destroy this separation. The division is not between the real and yourself, it is in yourself. What is essential is to understand the increasing conflict of desire, and this understanding comes only through self-knowledge and constant awareness of the movements of these self. February 4. Beyond A. 11. Experiencing. Understanding of the self requires a great deal of intelligence, a great deal of watchfulness, alertness, watching ceaselessly so that it does not slip away. I, who am very earnest, want to dissolve the self. When I say that, I know it is possible to dissolve the self. Please be patient. The moment I say, I want to dissolve this, and in the process I follow for the dissolution of that, there is the experiencing of the self, and so, the self is strengthened. So, how is it possible for the self not to experience? One can see that creation is not at all the experience of the self. Creation is when the self is not there, because creation is not intellectual, is not of the mind, is not self-projected, is something beyond all experiencing, as we know it. Is it possible for the mind to be quite still, in a state of non-recognition, which is non-experiencing, to be in a state in which creation can take place, which means, when the self is not there, when the self is absent? Am I making myself clear or not? The problem is this, is it not? Any movement of the mind, positive or negative, is an experience which actually strengthens the me. Is it possible for the mind not to recognize? That can only take place when there is complete silence, but not the silence which is an experience of the self and which therefore strengthens the self. February 5. What is the self? The search for power, position, authority, ambition, and all the rest, are the forms of the self in all its different ways. But what is important is to understand the self, and I am sure you and I are convinced of it. If I may add here, let us be earnest about this matter, because I feel that if you and I as individuals, not as a group of people belonging to certain classes, certain societies, certain climatic divisions, can understand this and act upon this, then I think there will be real revolution. The moment it becomes universal and better organized, the self takes shelter in that, whereas, if you and I as individuals can love, can carry this out actually in everyday life, then the revolution that is so essential will come into being. You know what I mean by the self? By that, I mean the idea, the memory, the conclusion, the experience, the various forms of nameable and unnameable intentions, the conscious endeavor to be or not to be, the accumulated memory of the unconscious, the racial, the group, the individual, the clan, and the whole of it all, whether it is projected outwardly in action, or projected spiritually as virtue. The striving after all this is the self. In it is included the competition, the desire to be. The whole process of that is the self, and we know actually when we are faced with it that it is an evil thing. I am using the word evil intentionally, because the self is dividing, the self is self-enclosing. Its activities, however noble, are separated and isolated. We know all this. We also know that extraordinary are the moments when the self is not there, in which there is no sense of endeavor, of effort, and which happens when there is love. February 6. When there is love, self is not. Reality, truth, is not to be recognized. For truth to come, belief, knowledge, experiencing, virtue, pursuit of virtue, which is different from being virtuous. All this must go. The virtuous person, who is conscious of pursuing virtue, can never find reality. He may be a very decent person, that is entirely different from the man of truth, from the man who understands. To the man of truth, truth has come into being. A virtuous man is a righteous man, and a righteous man can never understand what is truth, because virtue to him is the covering of the self, the strengthening of the self, because he is pursuing virtue. When he says, I must be without greed, the state in which he is non-greedy and which he experiences, strengthens the self. That is why it is so important to be poor, not only in the things of the world, but also in belief and in knowledge. A man rich with worldly riches, or a man rich in knowledge and belief, will never know anything but darkness, and will be the center of all mischief and misery. But if you and I, as individuals, can see this whole working of the self, then we shall know what love is. I assure you that is the only reformation which can possibly change the world. Love is not the self. Self can recognize love. You say, I love. But then, in the very saying of it, in the very experiencing of it, love is not. But, when you know love, self is not. When there is love, self is not. February 7. Understanding what is. Surely, a man who is understanding life does not want beliefs. A man who loves has no beliefs, he loves. It is Theman who is consumed by the intellect who has beliefs, because intellect is always seeking security, protection, it is always avoiding danger, and therefore it builds ideas, beliefs, ideals, behind which it can take shelter. What would happen if you dealt with violence directly, now? You would be danger to society, and because the mind foresees the danger, it says, I will achieve the ideal of non-violence 10 years later, which is such a fictitious false process. To understand what is more important than to create and follow ideals, because ideals are false, and what is ethereal. To understand what is requires an enormous capacity, swift and unprejudiced mind. It is because we don't want to face and understand what is that we invent the many ways of escape and give them lovely names as the ideal, the belief, God. Surely, it is only when I see the false as the false that my mind is capable of perceiving what is true. A mind that is confused in the false can never find the truth. Therefore, I must understand what is false in my relationships, in my ideas, in the things about me, because to perceive the truth requires the understanding of the false. Without removing the causes of ignorance, there cannot be enlightenment, and to seek enlightenment when the mind I soon enlightened is utterly empty, meaningless. Therefore, it must begin to see the false in my relationships with ideas, with people, with things. When the mind sees that which is false, then that which is true comes into being, and then there is ecstasy, there is happiness. February 8. What we believe. Does belief give enthusiasm? Can enthusiasm sustain itself without a belief, and is enthusiasm at all necessary, or is a different kind of energy needed, a different kind of vitality, drive? Most of us have enthusiasm for something or other. We are very keen, very enthusiastic about concerts, about physical exercise, or about going to a picnic. Unless it is nourished all the time by something or other, it fades away and we have a new enthusiasm for other things. Is there a self-sustaining force, energy, which doesn't depend on a belief? The other question is, do we need a belief of any kind, and if we do, why is it necessary? That's one of the problems evolved. We don't need a belief that there is sunshine, the mountains, the rivers. We don't need a belief that we and our wives quarrel. We don't have to have a belief that life is a terrible misery with its anguish, conflict, and constant ambition. It is a fact. But we demand a belief when we want to escape from a fact into an unreality. February 9. Agitated by belief. So, your religion, your belief in God, is an escape from actuality, and therefore, it is no religion at all. The rich man who accumulates money through cruelty, through dishonesty, through cunning exploitation believes in God. And you also believe in God. You also are cunning, cruel, suspicious, envious. Is God to be found through dishonesty, through deceit, through cunning tricks of the mind? Because you collect all the sacred books and the various symbols of God, does that indicate that you are a religious person? So, religion is not escape from the fact. Religion is the understanding of the fact of what you are in your everyday relationships. Religion is the manner of your speech, the way you talk, the way you address your servants, the way you treat your wife, your children, and neighbors. As long as you do not understand your relationship with your neighbor, with society, with your wife and children, there must be confusion. And whatever it does, the mind that is confused will only create more confusion, more problems, and conflict. A mind that escapes from the actual, from the facts of relationship, shall never find God. A mind that is agitated by belief shall not know truth. But the mind that understands its relationship with property, with people, with ideas, the mind which no longer struggles with the problems which relationship creates, and for which the solution is not withdrawal, but the understanding of love. Such a mind alone can understand reality. February 10. Beyond belief. We realize that life is ugly, painful, sorrowful. We want some kind of theory, some kind of speculation or satisfaction, some kind of doctrine which will explain all this, and so we are caught in explanation, in words, in theories, and gradually beliefs become deeply rooted and unshakable because behind those beliefs, behind those dogmas, there is the constant fear of the unknown. But we never look at that fear. We turn away from it. The stronger the beliefs, the stronger the dogmas. And when we examine these beliefs, the Christian, the Hindu, the Buddhist, we find that they divide people. Each dogma, each belief has a series of rituals, a series of compulsions which bind man and separate man. So, we start with an inquiry to find out what is true, what the significance is of this misery, this struggle, this pain, and we are soon caught up in beliefs, in rituals, in theories. Belief is corruption because behind belief and morality lurks the mind, the self growing big, powerful, and strong. We consider belief in God, the belief in something, as religion. We consider that to believe is to be religious. You understand? If you do not believe, you will be considered an atheist, you will be condemned by society. One society will condemn those who believe in God, and another society will condemn those who do not. They are both the same. So, religion becomes a matter of belief, and belief acts and has a corresponding influence on the mind. The mind then can never be free. But it is only in freedom that you can find out what is true, what is God, not through any belief, because your very belief projects what you think ought to be God, what you think ought to be true. February 11. The screen of belief. You believe in God, and another does not believe in God, so your beliefs separate you from each other. Belief throughout the world is organized as Hinduism, Buddhism, or Christianity, and so it divides man from man. We are confused, and we think that through belief we shall clear the confusion. That is, belief is superimposed on the confusion, and we hope that confusion will thereby be cleared away. But belief is merely an escape from the fact of confusion. It does not help us to face and to understand the fact but torn away from the confusion in which we are. To understand the confusion, belief is not necessary, and belief only acts as a screen between ourselves and our problems. So, religion, which is organized belief, becomes a means of escape from what is, from the fact of confusion. The man who believes in God, the man who believes in the hereafter, or who has any other form of belief, is escaping from the fact of what hides. Do you not know those who believe in God, who do puja, who repeat certain chants and words, and who in their daily life are dominating, cruel, ambitious, cheating, dishonest? Shall they find God? Are they really seeking God? Is God to be found through repetition of words, through belief? But such people believe in God, they worship God, they go to the temple every day, they do everything to avoid the fact of what they are. And such people you consider respectable because they are yourself. February 12. Meeting life anew. One of the things, it seems to me, that most of us eagerly accept and take for granted is the question of beliefs. I am not attacking beliefs. What we are trying to do is to find out why we accept beliefs, and if we can understand thematives, the causation of acceptance, then perhaps we may be able not only to understand why we do it, also be free of it. One can see how political and religious beliefs, national and various other types of beliefs, do separate people, do create conflict, confusion, and antagonism, which is an obvious fact. And yet we are unwilling to give them up. There is the Hindu belief, the Christian belief, the Buddhist innumerable sectarian and national beliefs, various political ideologies, all contending with one another, trying to convert one another. One can see, obviously, that belief is separating people, creating intolerance. Is it possible to live without belief? One can find that out only if one can study oneself in relationship to a belief. Is it possible to live in this world without a belief? Not change beliefs, not substitute one belief for another, but be entirely free from all beliefs, so that one meets life anew each minute? This, after all, is the truth. To have the capacity of meeting everything anew, from moment to moment, without the conditioning reaction of the past, so that there is not the cumulative effect which acts as a barrier between oneself and that which is. February 13. Belief hinders true understanding. If we had no belief, what would happen to us? shouldn't we be very frightened of what might happen? If we had no pattern of action, based on a belief either in God or in communism, or in socialism, or in imperialism, or in some kind of religious formula, some dogma in which we are conditioned, we should feel utterly lost, shouldn't we? And is not this acceptance of a belief the covering up of that fear? The fear of being really nothing, of being empty. After all, a cup is useful only when it is empty. And a mind that is filled with beliefs, with dogmas, with assertions, with quotations, is really an uncreative mind. It is merely a repetitive mind. To escape from that fear of emptiness, that fear of loneliness, that fear of stagnation, of not arriving, not succeeding, not achieving, not being something, not becoming something, is surely one of the reasons, is it not, why we accept beliefs so eagerly and greedily. And, through acceptance of belief, do we understand ourselves? On the contrary, a belief, religious or political, obviously hinders the understanding of ourselves. It acts as a screen through which we look at ourselves. And can we look at ourselves without beliefs? If we remove these beliefs, the many beliefs that one has, is there anything left to look at? If we have no beliefs with which the mind has identified itself, then the mind, without identification, is capable of looking at itself as it is, and then, surely there is the beginning of the understanding of oneself. February 14. Direct observation. Why do ideas take root in our minds? Why do not facts become all important, not ideas? Why do theories, ideas, become so significant rather than the fact? Is it that we cannot understand the fact, or have not the capacity, or are afraid of facing the fact? Therefore, ideas, speculations, theories are a means of escaping away from the fact. You may run away, you may do all kinds of things. The facts are there. The fact that one is angry, the fact that one is ambitious, the fact that one is sexual, a dozen things. You may suppress them, you may transmute them, which is another form of suppression. You may control them, but they are all suppressed, controlled, disciplined with ideas. Do not ideas waste our energy? Do not ideas dull the mind? You may be clever in speculation, in quotations, but it is obviously a dull mind that quotes, that has read a lot, and quotes. You remove the conflict of the opposite in one stroke, if you live with the fact, and therefore liberate the energy to face the fact. For most of us, contradiction is an extraordinary field in which the mind is caught. I want to do this, and I do something entirely different. But if I face the fact of wanting to do this, there is no contradiction, and therefore, at one stroke I abolish altogether all sense of the opposite, and my mind then is completely concerned with what is, and with the understanding of what is. February 15. Action without idea. It is only when the mind is free from idea that there can be experiencing. Ideas are not truth, and truth is something that must be experienced directly, from moment to moment. It is not an experience which you want, which is then merely sensation. Only when one can go beyond the bundle of ideas, which is the me, which is the mind, which has a partial or complete continuity. Only when one can go beyond that, when thought is completely silent, is there a state of experiencing. Then one shall know what truth is. February 16.